Rain fell in relentless sheets, pounding against the cobblestone streets of Blackwater Hollow. The town was nestled between jagged cliffs and an endless forest, perpetually shrouded in mist. It was the kind of place where secrets festered, buried deep beneath layers of whispers and lies. Eleanor Hart returned to her childhood home after a decade of absence. The grand but decrepit estate stood on the outskirts of the hollow, its gabled roof sagging under the weight of time. She had been called back by a cryptic letter from her estranged mother, Margaret, who hadn't spoken to her since the day Eleanor left. "Eleanor," the letter began, "the truth cannot stay hidden any longer. Come home. You must know before it's too late." There had been no further explanation, but something in her mother's trembling handwriting unsettled Eleanor. Despite the years of silence and bitterness, she couldn't ignore the urgency in the message. The house was eerily quiet when she arrived. Dust blanketed every surface, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten memories. The once vibrant wallpaper was peeling, revealing dark patches of rot beneath. Margaret was nowhere to be found. Eleanor wandered through the house, calling for her mother, but only the echo of her own voice responded. In the study, she found a single envelope addressed to her, resting atop the desk. Inside was an old key and a note in her mother's familiar scrawl, "The cellar." A shiver ran down her spine. The cellar had always been forbidden territory. As a child, she had asked about it once, only to be met with a stern warning and a rare flash of fear in her mother's eyes. Now, standing before the heavy oak door at the back of the house, she hesitated. The key turned with a reluctant groan, and the door creaked open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Eleanor grabbed a lantern from the hall and lit it, the flickering flame casting uneasy shadows on the damp stone walls. She descended slowly, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, she found a sprawling chamber lined with shelves of old books, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and strange artifacts that seemed out of place in her family's history. In the center of the room was a large, intricately carved table. Spread across it was a map of Blackwater Hollow, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Eleanor's gaze was drawn to a small, locked chest resting on the table. The key in her hand fit perfectly, and inside she found a bundle of letters tied with a frayed ribbon. The letters were addressed to her mother, but the sender's name was unfamiliar, Jonathan Ashcroft. She read the first letter, her heart pounding with every word. "Margaret. I fear the Hollow's curse grows stronger. The others refuse to listen, but the signs are undeniable. The disappearances, the whispers in the woods, they're all connected. We must act before it's too late. Burn this after reading. No one must know. Jonathan." Eleanor's mind raced. A curse? Disappearances? None of it made sense. She read on, each letter unraveling a story of desperation and dread. Jonathan wrote of rituals performed in secret, of an ancient entity bound beneath the hollow, and of a pact made generations ago to keep it contained. But something had gone wrong. The final letter was smeared with what looked like dried blood. "Margaret. The barrier is weakening. I've done all I can, but it's no longer enough. The truth must be passed on. Prepare Eleanor. She is the key now. Forgive me." Eleanor clutched the letter, her hands trembling. A noise behind her made her spin around, the lantern's light revealing her mother standing at the foot of the stairs. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes sunken and haunted. "You weren't supposed to find this," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place? What's happening?" Eleanor demanded. Margaret's shoulders sagged under the weight of decades of secrecy. "It's time you knew the truth," she said, motioning for Eleanor to follow her. They ascended the stairs and returned to the study, where Margaret poured herself a glass of whiskey and downed it in one gulp. She began her tale, her voice trembling but resolute. Blackwater Hollow, she explained, was not an ordinary town. Centuries ago, settlers had stumbled upon something ancient and malevolent buried deep beneath the earth. They had made a pact to contain it, binding their bloodlines to the task. Eleanor's family had been among the first, their lineage cursed to bear the burden of maintaining the barrier. What happens if the barrier breaks? Eleanor asked, her throat dry. Margaret's gaze was distant. It awakens, and everything we know will be consumed. Eleanor struggled to process the revelation. Her family's history was steeped in darkness, their lives dictated by a duty she had never known. And now, according to Jonathan's letter, she was somehow central to it all. Before she could ask more, a deafening crash shook the house. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Margaret grabbed Eleanor's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "It started," she said, her voice taut with fear. "We have to go." "Go where?" Eleanor asked, but Margaret was already pulling her toward the door. Outside, the storm had intensified. The wind howled like a living thing, and the forest seemed to writhe in the darkness. Margaret led Eleanor to an old chapel on the edge of the estate, its stained glass windows shattered and its doors hanging ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. At the altar, Margaret retrieved a leather-bound tome and began flipping through its pages. The words were in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, and Margaret chanted them with a desperation that sent chills down her spine. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, her voice rising over the storm. "The ritual," Margaret said, not pausing in her incantation. "It's the only way to strengthen the barrier." Before Eleanor could respond, the ground trembled violently. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chapel, and a shadow began to take shape in the air before them. It was formless yet terrifying, its presence oppressive and suffocating. Margaret's chanting grew louder, her voice strained. The shadow lashed out, and Eleanor was thrown against the wall, the lantern shattering beside her. Dazed, she watched as Margaret's body stiffened, her face contorted in pain. "Run!" Margaret screamed, but Eleanor couldn't leave her mother. Summoning her courage, she grabbed the tome and tried to decipher the ancient script. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe on the page, but a phrase stood out, glowing faintly. She spoke the words aloud, her voice trembling but firm. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering. Eleanor repeated the incantation, each word filling her with a strange, otherworldly strength. The shadow let out a piercing shriek before dissipating into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret collapsed to the floor, her breathing shallow. Eleanor rushed to her side, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," Margaret whispered, her lips barely moving. "The barrier is safe, for now." "Don't leave me," Eleanor begged, but Margaret's eyes fluttered shut, and her body went still. Eleanor sat there, cradling her mother's lifeless form, the weight of her family's legacy pressing down on her. The hidden truth was no longer hidden, but the burden it carried was hers alone. The storm outside began to subside, but the hollow's secrets were far from over. As dawn broke over the misty cliffs, Eleanor vowed to uncover the full extent of the truth and ensure the barrier would never break again. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you smash that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications to help the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.